In 1930 and 1933 in Kazakhstan there was a tragic period associated with the mass starvation caused by the policy of collectivization and forced seizure of food by the Soviet authorities. In 1928 there were 40 million heads of cattle, but in 1930 only 4 million heads of cattle remained, and this led to the famine and mass deaths of Kazakh people.
Мы строим коммунизм!
In 1925, Philip Goloshokin, a well-known figure of All-Union Communist Party, was appointed as the first secretary of Kazakh Raikomit. He spent first 2 years of his rule from 1925 to 1927 in the Kazakh region. At that time, the vast majority of Kazakhs were semi-nomadic. According to 1926 census, a quarter of Kazakhs were sedentary, 6% of Kazakhs were nomadic, and more than 65% of Kazakhs were semi-nomadic.
During these years, people were deprived of livestock and property and sent to resettlement points under police surveillance. Due to the impossibility of grazing cattle gathered in one place, animals requisitioned for the needs of collective farms were slaughtered on the spot. By 1933, a tenth of the 40 million head of cattle remained, and Kazakhs were the first to suffer from such actions, as their main and often the only source of livelihood was cattle.
The case started by the famine in Kazakhstan was the confiscation carried out in the spring of 1928 and in the fall of 1928. 11,260 peasant farms were confiscated, and about 4.5 million head of livestock, in terms of cattle, were seized. As Goloshokin himself said, the Soviet government's official plans were twice as large. They intended to confiscate Kazakh cattle as much as possible. The total number of the reach was not to exceed 150 head in each farm.
One of the main causes of the famine was the policy of collectivization, which resulted in Kazakh peasants seizing grain, livestock, and other agricultural resources. Government campaign to accelerate industrialization also plundered the population resources, leading to the food shortages. Millions of people suffered from starvation and food shortages. Official casualty figures vary, but estimates range from the few hundred thousand to the several million.
The famine led to the agonizing deaths of many people, especially children and the elderly. Inadequate nutrition and lack of medical care led to high mortality and the deaths of the entire dynasty. As a part of collectivization policy and fight against kulaks or rich peasants, strict measures were taken, such as confiscation of grain or destruction of family farms, and also deportation of people to labor fields or camps. These actions further intensified the famine and destroyed the existing agricultural structures.
On the state of the Kazakh people who died of hunger, wrote letters to Goloshokin. Writers: Labid Musrepov, Mansur Gataulin, Yembergen Altınbekov, Mutash Davletkaliyev, and Kadir Kanyshev. They were alarmed, stating that the collapse of animal husbandry, sociological transformations, sedentarization and collectivization, and the policy of tribute collection had led to famine. This has remained in history under the title Letter of Five.
Unfortunately, the words of the creative intelligentsia were perceived as a manifestation of nationalism, as a desire for wealth. The authors of the letter were accused as nationalists, defenders of the interests of the rich. They were threatened with expulsion from the party and criminal prosecution. After the regional committee got acquainted with the letter, the psychological pressure exerted on its authors became a serious criticism for them. The famine caused serious damage to Kazakhstan's agriculture and economy. The lofty goal set for collectivization and grain supplies in the Soviet Union contributed to this crisis. Many farms were destroyed and fertile land became unusable. The famine led to a mass migration of people from rural areas to cities and other regions of the USSR. This led to a change in the demographic structure of Kazakhstan and social problems related to the adaptation of migrants. The famine of 1930-33 left an indelible trace in the history of Kazakhstan.